Yeah, so I'm going to be talking to you about this new project called the Open Service Broker API. And so there's going to be a prize. It's open source, so it's free for everyone to download after the talk. So this is a project launched end of last year. We're going to dive into a bit more of its background, some of its history. You can hear about the kind of community that's around the Open Service Broker. And then we'll also talk about some of the new features that you're going to start seeing across various cloud platforms. So yeah, quick intro, product manager here at Pivotal. Work on Cloud Foundry and Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Done a lot of work around cloud services. And now I'm on the Open Service Broker API community member, working with that group. So yeah, what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about first kind of what is this Open Service Broker API, why should you really be interested in it. We're going to say what can you do with the API today, because it's a pre-existing specification. It's kind of just been rebranded and relaunched with a new group around it. And we're going to say what we're going to do tomorrow. There's some cool stuff coming up, lots of engagement from the community, so I'm going to tell you about a few new features and how you might start seeing them in Cloud Foundry and other projects. And then getting involved, because there's loads of opportunities. It's all open source, very collaborative community, so everyone's welcome to get involved, but I'll tell you exactly how you can do that as well. So yeah, let's have a look at what is the Open Service Broker API and what problems we're trying to solve with this API. So to start with, classic problem, right? Applications need access to data. They're probably running currently in a big data center somewhere. They need to get access to this database, or maybe they need to get a new database. Normally they have this operations person that you'd be talking to get access to your MySQL database. They'll go off and provision you that database, get your credentials, give them back to you. They might even let you deploy your own application to the servers. And this takes months, and this is normally developers look like this when they can't ship code because they're waiting for databases to be created. We see it every day with big enterprise customers. They start a new project, they do all this innovation, and it's oh yeah, we can't ship to production because XYZ database server hasn't had the network rules applied, or some other crazy thing. And so hopefully this isn't too unfamiliar with people. But the model that the Open Service Broker API is applied is that you have your cloud platform on your left that you run your applications on. You introduce this concept called the Service Broker API, and then you have these service brokers. And so what we're presenting in the middle one is a service broker. The idea is that this responds to requests from a cloud platform. It can then know how to interpret that. So this example would be create a service. So the cloud platform would say, service broker, please create me a MySQL database. The service broker is then responsible for creating that database. And so that's the first key workflow. And you see here we've just removed the operator role, and you've been able to automate the whole provisioning of this service. So that's pretty awesome. So the next step is binding to a service. So this is where you need to be able to return some credentials to your cloud platform so the application can understand how to talk to your service you just created. And so this is also a responsibility of the service broker. It's handled through the Service Broker API specs. And so you can see here, example would be the username and password. You probably also return the IP address or the connection address for the database. And then finally, the next big part of this is using the service. And this is where the service broker and the Service Broker API just gets completely out of the way. So your applications then talk directly to your data service. So it's really just about the lifecycle management of that service, about creating it, how to provision connection credentials, and then how to tidy things up after you're done. So you can get a really quick provisioning of the services. You can connect them to lots of applications, so they can all make use of the service. And then if you don't need that service anymore, like you're using it in dev test, maybe in CI, you can just delete it. And it's no hassle for the developer. So a bit of background on this. This is called the Cloud Foundry Service Broker API. It's been around for a long time. It was first introduced when Cloud Foundry came out as a way to connect services. This is on a V1 API. And so in 2013, there's a relaunch of this API for V2, really trying to enhance a lot of the original features, rip out some of the stuff that didn't work in early Cloud Foundry versions, and really increased its capabilities. And so this really caught the attention of the ecosystem, and you can see there's a lot of service providers and service technology companies in here. Many of them provide services across various Cloud Foundry platforms like Pivotal Cloud Foundry or Bluemix, some major ones. But what you're seeing is this Service Broker API is one of the big reasons you're also seeing a huge ecosystem movement around Cloud Foundry, which is why it kind of caught the eye of the kind of cloud community. And it was one of the key driving factors why they want to form the Open Service Broker API. So not just Cloud Foundry can get access to this huge community, but other cloud platforms. We'll talk about some more examples in a bit. So yeah, if you are a service provider, so say if you want to offer your service through the Open Service Broker API, you just need to implement a service broker that conforms to the Service Broker API specification. It's already published. It's currently hosted on the Cloud Foundry site, but it's going to be moving over to the Open Service Broker community. And yeah, so the specification's been around for a while. It's on like 2.11 at the moment of the spec, and it's kind of designed to be additive. So you can use the current specification, and it's going to work with the new Open Service Broker specification. The next release of it will actually be Open Service Broker API 2.12. So it's fully backwards compatible. So if you're wanting to write a service, you can start now. It's a really simple interface. There's about 7 endpoints you can implement. Like about 4 of those are optional. So it's really quick to get started and build a service broker. You can build a service broker to connect to an existing data service. You don't have to be provisioning it on demand. This service broker could send an email, and someone could go and create that, and it fully supports synchronous or asynchronous provisioning models, which is pretty cool. So if you're an operator of one of these cloud platforms and you want to bring services, a good example is Cloud Foundry. So Cloud Foundry has a services marketplace, and so if you want to bring say MySQL service to Cloud Foundry, you find your service provider, and then you just run this one simple command, cf create service broker, some credentials that you need to connect, and then you need the URL to talk to the service broker. And then you can run cf enable service access, and then you've got everyone on your platform able to use a MySQL service by that service provider. So it's really simple to integrate and create this marketplace. And that's the kind of Cloud Foundry experience, which is the first marketplace example. And if you're a developer using these services, this is probably anyone's familiar with Cloud Foundry. This is super simple. It's cf push, so get your application running. Cf create service. You could say create me a Redis. I want that to be on the small plan. By small plan, it could be whether it's the VM size or how much memory is allocated, how much disk is on that server. And then you can give it a name. And so then you can use Cloud Foundry bind my service, my app, and then you'll say to your Redis. And this will mean that the service broker will give your application credentials to talk to that Redis. And then you just restart your app, it'll be picked up, and then your application can talk to Redis. So really straightforward from the app developer experience. You compare this to most processes, and this will take you 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes. Depends which build pack you're using, how fast that will go through. But yeah, so if you look at, this was the Cloud Foundry Service Broker API, and then we've just effectively smashed that open and called it the Open Service Broker API. And this is just, we're going to get into who's involved in the Open Service Broker. It's a lot more of the kind of cloud native community. But an interesting quote when it was launched from Abby Kearns, who's the kind of director of Cloud Foundry. She was saying, by standardizing the industry on this Open Service Broker API, we'll build a foundation for an ecosystem that transcends a single community. So the idea is taking something great that the Cloud Foundry community have made and then making it an open platform so that anyone can make use of this. This is going to benefit Cloud Foundry and and other platforms. Other platforms will get access to all of the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, but what we should see is many more service providers are willing to build an integration based on this specification. Because you're not just working with Cloud Foundry, you'll be able to work with kind of any cloud platform that adopts this standard. So this is the tagline from the website. There's a focus on making life better for developers, because developers need these services, and hopefully what we should see is that there's not going to be that, I have to go to this platform because it has this service. You're going to see a model where you can access services from any platform. So 3 main goals of the project when we kind of formed this was to define and evolve this specification. The idea is we had a few people in the Cloud Foundry community really interested in this, but we thought, hey, if we open this up, there's going to be many more people to bring their problems, their use cases. We can get much more engagement. Second thing that we've been doing is trying to create this conformance test suite, so that if you're a platform or if you're a service broker, you can be verified that you work with this API specification. So this is quite important to lots of enterprises, because they want to be verified against that the platform actually supports this specification, and then you really get that portability if you can verify a service will work with any cloud platform. And the third one is really advocating to get this broad adoption. And I think that this is one of the main things that we really want to see, and I think it's a key to unlocking kind of multi-cloud services where you don't really care where they're running, you can get access to them from whatever platform. And really, if we can achieve this through this API, getting this broad kind of adoption and end user buy-in, I think that's going to be a big step forward for allowing you to have much more portability with your applications. So that's pretty cool. So some of the people that are involved, we've got people from Google, IBM, Red Hat, SAP, also Pivotal, Fujitsu. And you can see that some of these people might be familiar from the Kubernetes community. There's a few core committers from Kubernetes. There's also some people that have been involved in Cloud Foundry from pretty early on, like Shannon Cohen here is the lead for the project. And so, yeah, it's a real diverse group of people from lots of different companies bringing their kind of own problems, which has been great so far. We've seen it's really sparked a lot of collaboration and innovation in the API. So, what is the process that we're trying to follow? Because we've got people coming from these different backgrounds, and one of the first things we did was, how can we get things moving again, and how can we make sure that the right changes are getting into the spec? Because specification is a bit of a weird one, because we're not actually implementing a server here. We have reference implementations of clients like Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, but in terms of what we're producing as a community, it's just a spec. And so the first process we've got is someone proposes a change. Anyone can do this. You can go on GitHub now, create an issue, put a Google Doc with what you think this should look like. The community get together once a week on a Hangout and talk through, review the proposals. There's kind of collaboration a lot offline on Google Docs and things. But the idea is to get the working group talking about it, bringing their own use cases. We've seen some great use cases from Fujitsu and Google so far. And then we get community feedback. So if you're on the Cloud Foundry mailing lists or the Kubernetes special interest groups, you'll probably start seeing mails about, hey, what do you think of this service broker API specification enhancement or change? Will it have an impact to you? And then finally, we do a reference, well, not finally actually, we do a reference implementation. So this is where one of the platforms will volunteer. So it will either be, say, Cloud Foundry might say, hey, we're really interested in developing this feature. We'll put some engineers on it to support it in the Cloud Foundry platform. Or it could be the Kubernetes folks might do the same. But once we've got that reference implementation, we do another round of feedback. So it's did this design really work in a cloud platform? Because there's no good at working on paper if it's not really usable. And then we can kind of iterate through this reference implementation phase. And we've got kind of one thing so far in implementation, which has been quite good. Yeah, and then finally we see the specs changed and the specs released. And so we hope to be able to get through this process fairly quickly, but there is more steps involved because we've introduced 2 or 3 new communities. They're all still learning about the API, and so don't be too frustrated if you see things getting in lots of discussions, because we're kind of in the phase now where we're teaching everyone the history, why things have been done a certain way, and just making sure we're making the right choices. But really, let's get into the interesting stuff. What can you do with the API today? You create services marketplaces. So if you're an operator of a cloud platform, one of the things you want to do is offer your application developers this really rich marketplace. You might have seen Fujitsu just announced an open source project that's about creating these cloud marketplaces, and that's why they're kind of trying to drive this standardization so they can create rich integrations for their marketplace. But a great example is the Pivotal Web Services marketplace. This is Pivotal's Cloud Foundry that you can go and use. You can go on, browse your applications and select them. This is all built on the Cloud Foundry APIs that serve up the service broker API specification. So any of these services that are registered will have been registered through a service broker. And so it's a really easy way to build these composable marketplaces. So if we wanted to offer a new service on Pivotal Web Services, we could simply just go Cloud Foundry create service broker, and then everyone on Pivotal Web Services could make use of this new service. This is a project called the Service Catalog. It's the Kubernetes project. It's currently in the Kubernetes Incubator project organization. It's called, yeah. So the idea behind this is they wanted to take just the services slice of the Cloud Foundry. If you're familiar, there's a Cloud Foundry cloud controller that also handles this cloud marketplace. They just wanted to take the services part of that and bring that into Kubernetes. And so they've started a project to try and get the benefits of that. So the idea is that any application that runs on Kubernetes will be able to create and consume the services natively in Kubernetes. But this is a really active community as well. And they've got a special interest group mailing list on the Kubernetes site, so you can check that out. But they're doing some really interesting stuff. And it's all like greenfield, so they're moving really quickly, which is awesome. So the next thing you might want to do is you might want to create a service broker. Kind of touched on the patterns earlier for what a service broker looks like. But there's some various types of broker that you can implement. So the first type is what we call like a standard service broker. This is where you provision a service like MySQL. You might give an email server or access to an email server. And so it's kind of quite straightforward data services you might see offered through this model. A newer thing is called root services. And so this is how you combine a new type of service that essentially allows the cloud platform to route requests first to the root service. So examples of this are kind of API gateways, where you might want to do some access control or verification or enrich the message. And so this means that a request comes into the platform, goes to your root service, and then is forwarded to the application. And we've seen use cases for this from Apogee, who have been leading the way and giving lots of root service examples. But it's really good to kind of increase enterprise security by putting these root services in front of your apps. And the newest one is volume services. And so Cloud Foundry is famous for like 12 factors, don't store data on disk. But we realized there's a use case for when you might want a volume to attach to your container. This is if you're doing the kind of pattern where you might be having some data processing on the platform and you want to attach like a large amount of raw data on a disk and have it attached to your container. So you can also offer a volume service as part of this API. This just returns information about what to mount, any access credentials and things, and that's all giving it back to the cloud platform. So I think Cloud Foundry now has full support for volume services, root services, and the standard broker pattern. I'm not sure how far Kubernetes have got on this pattern, but I think they'll have to end up supporting volume services as part of the specification. But it is additive, so you don't have to support all of these services in the cloud platform. So yeah, another part of building the service broker is defining your service plans. And so this is like, what does the user get when they create a service? And so example would be here, like, what kind of VM sizes do you get? What kind of resource utilization can you have? And so it's saying, as a service provider, this is the profile of things you get. You can say how much it costs, because people have to pay for these services. And you can also say there's this interesting thing for what extra input parameters can you take. So you can imagine you might want to customize and allow like certain properties to be set. Like if you created a MySQL, you might want to be able to set the max connections for that database. And so we have this thing called arbitrary parameters or input parameters. And so you can also specify that in your service plan. Cool. So what are we doing next? So what's coming up in the API next? Schemas. And so we found one of the big flaws in the API is that really it's not too machine readable, especially around the input parameters I just mentioned. So the input parameters are kind of dynamic and they're not part of the what they call the catalog that gets defined as part of your service. So there's a big drive to add some schemas. So really, if you look at, this is what your plan definition would look like if you're providing a service. So when you tell a cloud platform, hey, I'm a service provider, you actually say, these are the plans I offer, and these are what you can put into your marketplace. So you can see here we're going to be adding this schema definition, and it's going to be method-based. So you can see if you're trying to create a service, this will be you'll be able to define a schema of parameters that you accept. It's using JSON schema, which is it's proving like quite popular with everyone in the working group. But the idea is we're not schematizing the whole API yet and making it really extensible. We just found the problem around these parameters, and so we're going to schematize that first, see how that works. But what we should be able to start doing is generating UI experiences based on these schemas. So if you're familiar with Pivotal Apps Manager, we can imagine that when you go to create a service, if there are input parameters, it could generate you the UI. Or same thing for the Cloud Foundry CLI. You could be prompted for certain parameters if you wanted to. And so yeah, this is in design at the moment, and there's an active issue on the GitHub. And so if you're interested in this and think it might be helpful for your service, check that out. The next thing is improved authorization and authentication. Service Broker currently only supports the basic auth model, which just doesn't seem to cut it for any big enterprise customers or like service providers. And so we're working on a new kind of improved security model. It looks like it's going to involve using OAuth 2 and JWT. And the main use cases here are either for identifying the platform and then what permissions they can create, because now you can have this service broker that works with Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes. Cloud Foundry might have less permissions, different platforms, and so we think that tokens will go a long way to help us solve that problem. And architecture diagram for fun. And this is what the procurement model would look like. And so you can see the service broker APIs like here. And the idea is that if you're a user, you can request a token from this procurement API, and then you'll be able to give that to the service broker. And that's almost like, okay, I paid for it, and here's my permission to create this service. And so this was proposed by the team at Google. And it's also
it's a bit similar to what I think on Google Cloud Platform.
Yeah.
The service model thing.
Yeah, I think that's where they took their inspiration from. Yeah. So they're really keen to get this into the Service Broker API spec. And you can see this on the Open Service Broker website, which leads me nicely onto how can I get involved in this awesome project. So there's 3 ways you can kind of interact. We have this weekly call. So if you have an issue you're really passionate about or want to share your use case, come along and put the item on the agenda. It's fully open, anyone can join. There's also Slack. There's quite active discussion in Slack around these issues. So get on Slack. And finally, if you want to discuss about these new features or want to see improvements or just want to say that I'm a service provider, how would my use case map to the Service Broker API, you can stick an issue on GitHub. And you'll also see that's where all the active discussion is. So you can see anything with this reviewing proposal label as things are actively being discussed. There's one thing that's in implementation. But feel free to give feedback on these things or add new issues. And there's quite active stuff going on there all the time. So cool. I guess we have a bit of time for questions if we'll run through that pretty quick. Cool. No? Okay, well, I'd definitely recommend checking out the openservicebroker.api.org website. You can find more information there, and there's some good blog posts from Abby Kearns from the Cloud Foundry Foundation that really explain why this is going to be massive for the kind of cloud native platforms. It's kind of gone on under the radar a bit so far, but I think once things get moving, you'll probably see a lot more noise about it. So yeah.
Just converging in a way, with a Kubernetes or cloud platform, Cloud Foundry. It's converging in a way, at least on the whole, right?
Yeah, but at least how you offer the services, that's what we're really going for. We're not saying how you run the services, because if you're running services on Kubernetes or Bosch or whatever, it'll be different. But what we're just saying is let's make that interface the same. I think it's the first step towards standardization. But at least that that if you write a service, you can run it, or you can connect it to any platform. So yeah, it's the first step towards that.
I just realised it's a stupid question.
Colin?
My question's stupid, I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yes.
So to date, effectively, Crystal can able to act unilaterally on the Service Broker API and do whatever we want, which is when we can iterate quickly on it.
Yeah.
Development's going to slow down, now it becomes far more committee-based.
I think it's sped up, because there wasn't too many people in the Cloud Foundry community driving that much innovation in this. And we've seen now we've had this engagement from so many different companies, all bringing their use cases, and also the just thinking power. We've got some great people from the Kubernetes working groups that really smart people, and they're devoting a lot of their time to this API and the specification and use cases. And so I think we've seen it's actually sped things up in terms of innovation in the API. I don't think if we hadn't have created this Open Service Broker API group, we probably wouldn't have been talking about schemas and improved authentication model just yet in the Cloud Foundry community.
even with the schema thing, they have it in Google Cloud Platform in a way when you want to create like to provision services like a Jenkins with some parameters and then just provision it. So I think it might be there, but I think they're using YAML in a way to describe it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll see the whole thing, probably the whole API being schematized and being more extensible. But yeah, there's like the Google team have learned so much from running Google Cloud, and it's great that like everyone else gets to benefit from these best practices. It's pretty cool. Hey, Dom?
Sort of a better way to phrase it. If I was implementing a service for this API, what's kind of your goal for how much custom code I'd have to write for each platform to support? Because I know things like billing are very complicated and that kind of stuff. Do you have any idea on what your goal is for that?
So at the moment in Cloud Foundry, there's this organization space, and that's how things are modeled in terms of billing. That will be kept in the API. It's been slightly refactored, but Kubernetes has this thing namespace, which is their kind of version of that. And we're seeing that we're going to move those into this thing called context. If you need additional context for the platform, then you can use those. I think all of those billing problems will be solved once we get the authorization and authentication model in there, because the API at the moment doesn't have any concepts for that. So I think initially you'll still have to have like, this is how I link back to the billing for Kubernetes, or this is how I link back to the billing for Cloud Foundry. But once we have OAuth and JWT, we should see like ways around that. Cool. Awesome. All right.
Any questions?
Cool. No, thanks everyone.